Imagine a group of Lakota warriors armed with bows, a deep knowledge of the terrain, and a strategy sharper than a cavalry officer's mustache, completely outmaneuvering U.S. troops armed with rifles and cannons. This wasn't blind luck. This was next-level battlefield IQ. Yet, for decades, Hollywood had us believing Native American warfare was all wild screaming and reckless charges. It wasn't. Indigenous warriors weren't just fighters, they were tactical masterminds, turning the land itself into a weapon and using psychological warfare centuries before Sun Tzu made it cool. Take the Iroquois Confederacy. These guys weren't just winning battles. They played 4D chess while their enemies were still trying to figure out checkers. The Romans of the New World built an empire through diplomacy, psychological intimidation, and military strategy, making European powers sweat. But they weren't alone. The Comanche ran horseback guerrilla warfare like a fine-tuned machine, and the Cherokee could adapt their battle formations faster than a deer dodging arrows. So forget what the old cowboy movies told you. Native American warfare was all about intelligence, precision, and tactics that would still outfox an enemy today. Let's break it all down. Indigenous nations were already perfecting the art of war long before Europeans arrived. Contrary to the myth of peaceful tribes, conflict was common. Still, it rarely resembled the all-out slaughter seen in European battles. According to Canada.ca's Warfare in pre-Columbian North America, wars often served ritualistic or economic purposes. For example, the Morning Wars of the Iroquois were fought to capture enemies to replace deceased family members, a practice blending grief, spirituality, and political messaging. But don't mistake ritual for weakness. The Mesoamerican ballgame played by cultures like the Maya and Aztecs wasn't just a sport. It was a substitute for battlefield conflict, settling disputes through athletic competition and sometimes ritual sacrifice. Meanwhile, in the Great Lakes region, the Huron-Wendat nation built a sprawling trade empire by the 1500s, using alliances with neighboring tribes to isolate rivals and monopolize resources like copper and furs. Territorial battles did happen, but they were chess matches, not brawls. The Cahokia civilization, near modern-day St. Louis, used its Mississippi River stronghold to control trade across the Midwest around 1000 to 1350 CE. When conflicts arose, Cahokia's leaders deployed warriors in precise, organized formations, leveraging their central position to outflank enemies. Archaeology even reveals palisade walls and strategic hilltop forts, proof that Stone Age warfare was anything but simple. Pre-Columbian warfare was about maximizing gains while minimizing losses. Tribes avoided head-on clashes unless victory was certain. Instead, they used ambushes, sieges, and economic warfare, tactics that would later baffle European invaders. Here are some shocking and controversial facts that will change everything you thought you knew about Native Americans. But first, if you enjoy our content about Native Americans and the Old West, remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. Thanks for joining us once again. Let's begin. When the Pilgrims landed in 1620, they assumed their muskets and armor made them invincible. Then they met the Wampanoag. Fast forward to 1675, and the Wampanoag leader Metacom, called King Philip by colonists, united tribes across New England in a rebellion that nearly wiped out the Plymouth colony. How? By mastering guerrilla warfare. Metacom's forces refused to fight European style. Instead, they struck at dawn, ambushing isolated farms and vanishing before militias could respond. Burned crops and bridges, crippling the colonists' food supply and mobility. They used the forest as a weapon, luring British troops into swamps where heavy armor became a death trap. In one infamous raid during King Philip's War, 1675 to 1678, warriors attacked the settlement of Springfield, Massachusetts, destroying over 30 homes while avoiding confrontation with its garrison. Colonists wrote of invisible enemies who melted into trees like ghosts. By the war's end, 12 towns lay in ruins, and 1 in 10 colonial soldiers was dead. But Metacom wasn't alone. In the southeast, the Seminole turned Florida's Everglades into a fortress during the Seminole Wars, 1816 to 1858. They launched canoe raids on U.S. Army outposts, then retreated into mangroves where soldiers couldn't follow. Even General Thomas Jessup admitted, "The country is entirely unsuitable for civilized warfare. We fight knee-deep in water, chasing shadows." Guerrilla tactics weren't just about hiding, they were about control. Native fighters dictated when, where, and how battles happened. They turned their enemies' strengths, heavy weapons, rigid formations, into weaknesses. And when the U.S. cavalry showed up with Gatling guns in the 1800s, the Lakota and Cheyenne didn't panic. They adapted, using horseback mobility to stay one step ahead. Crazy Horse's victory at the Battle of the Rosebud, 1876, where he lured General Crook's troops into a miles-long ambush, proved that centuries-old tactics could still outsmart modern armies. By the early 1800s, the United States was expanding westward fast. But one man saw the threat and decided to fight back with unity. Tecumseh was a Shawnee leader who declared, "Sell a country? Why not sell the air, the clouds, the great sea?" His mission? To unite dozens of tribes into a single confederacy to block American settlers. Tecumseh wasn't just a warrior, he was a political visionary. Between 1808 and 1811, he traveled 3,000 miles from Wisconsin to Florida, convincing leaders like the Creek Choctaw and Ojibwe to join his alliance. His pitch was simple: divided, we fall; united, we might survive. By 1812, his confederacy controlled a territory larger than modern-day Texas. The U.S. government panicked. Governor William Henry Harrison called Tecumseh one of those uncommon geniuses who arise to revolutionize nations. To crush the Confederacy, Harrison attacked Tecumseh's base at Prophetstown, Indiana, in 1811, while the leader was away recruiting. The Battle of Tippecanoe was a tactical draw, but it burned the settlement, fueling Tecumseh's resolve. When the War of 1812 broke out, Tecumseh allied with the British, masterminding sieges like the capture of Detroit. His warriors used psychological tricks, drumming war songs at night, staging fake troop movements with torches, and spreading rumors of thousands of natives waiting to attack. It worked. In August 1812, British General Isaac Brock and Tecumseh took Detroit without firing a shot, scaring 2,500 U.S. troops into surrendering. But Tecumseh's greatest legacy was his strategy of mass resistance. He proved that fragmented tribes could become a powerhouse when united. Even after his death at the Battle of the Thames in 1813, his confederacy inspired future leaders like Black Hawk and Crazy Horse. As one U.S. soldier grumbled, Tecumseh turned tribes into an army. We weren't fighting savages. We were fighting a nation. Let's consider the Battle of Little Bighorn to fully grasp the greatness of Native Americans' war tactics. June 25, 1876. Armed with 700 cavalrymen and a massive ego, Lieutenant Colonel George Custer charged into Montana's Little Bighorn Valley. He expected an easy win against a few hostiles. Instead, he met 8,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, the largest native army ever assembled. The battle was a meticulous trap set by leaders Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. Here's how they pulled it off. Lure the enemy. Days earlier, Sitting Bull's scouts let Custer's men discover their camp, a classic decoy. Control the terrain. Crazy Horse hid thousands of warriors in ravines, forcing Custer to split his troops. Feigned retreats. Cheyenne riders pretended to flee, drawing Custer's men into a kill zone. In under an hour, Custer and 268 soldiers were dead. The native fighters used every trick, horseback agility. They circled Custer's men, firing arrows and rifles while staying mobile. Signal mirrors. Sioux lookouts flashed sunlight to coordinate attacks. Wolf pelts. Scouts disguised themselves to spy on U.S. troops undetected. But the real genius: misdirection. While Custer fixated on the main camp, warriors under Gall, a Hunkpapa Lakota leader, flanked his battalion from the rear. Meanwhile, Crazy Horse's forces blocked reinforcements. The result? A total rout that shocked the nation. One Cheyenne warrior later said, "We killed them all because they were too foolish to listen. They charged straight into our teeth." Little Bighorn wasn't just a victory. It proved that indigenous tactics could outthink industrial age firepower. Too bad the U.S. Army's response was brutal revenge. Within a year, the Great Sioux War ended with tribes forced onto reservations. But for one summer, the Plains tribes showed the world how to humble a superpower. Imagine you're a 17th century colonist in Virginia. One moonless night, you hear eerie cries echoing from the woods. Suddenly, arrows rain down, but you can't see a single attacker. This wasn't random terror. It was calculated psychological warfare, designed to break enemies before the first arrow flew. Native tribes weaponized fear in ways that would make modern special forces jealous. Take, for instance, the Comanche wolf cry. Raiders in Texas mimicked wolf howls to signal attacks, leaving settlers paranoid about every nighttime noise. Haida, forest phantoms. Pacific Northwest warriors, draped in cedar bark armor, which looked like tree bark, ambushed enemies, seeming to materialize from the woods. Seminole, swamp ghosts. In Florida, fighters submerged themselves in swamps, breathing through reed before lunging out to drag soldiers underwater. But the ultimate mind game? War paint. The Choctaw used black and red designs to resemble skeletons. At the same time, Apache warriors painted their horses' eyes to look demonic in battle. Even the Iroquois False Face Society carved grotesque masks to terrify foes, a tactic so effective that European accounts described them as devils incarnate. Fear wasn't just for show. During the 1622 Jamestown Massacre, Powhatan warriors killed 347 colonists in a single morning, then vanished. For months, survivors starved, too scared to farm or hunt. As colonist William Simmons wrote, "We dared not set foot beyond the palisade. They turned our land into a prison." And let's not forget siege psychology. During Pontiac's Rebellion, 1763, Ottawa and Delaware tribes surrounded Fort Pitt for 2 months. They didn't just blockade it. They lobbed diseased corpses over the walls, spreading smallpox. Gruesome? Absolutely. But was it effective? Yes, the British abandoned the fort by 1764. By the 1800s, tribes like the Lakota added a new twist, stampeding buffalo herds into enemy camps. At the Battle of Adobe Walls, 1874, Cheyenne and Comanche riders drove thousands of bison toward buffalo hunters' posts, collapsing walls and scattering gunmen. One hunter admitted, "We were ready for Indians, not a damned earthquake of hooves." Psychological warfare wasn't about cruelty. It was about efficiency. Why waste warriors in a frontal assault when fear could do the job? As a Cheyenne proverb says, a frightened enemy is already half defeated. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1500s with steel swords and matchlock guns, native tribes didn't panic. They experimented. By the 1600s, the Pueblo people of the Southwest were trading for European firearms. At the same time, the Apache reverse-engineered captured muskets to build their own. But here's the twist. They never abandoned traditional weapons. Instead, they created a hybrid arsenal. Take the Battle of Apache Pass, 1862. Chiricahua leader Cochise faced off against Union soldiers armed with howitzers. His fighters used bows for silent ambushes, rifles for long-range kills, and obsidian-tipped spears for close combat. Soldiers reported being stalked by ghosts who switched weapons mid-fight. Even General George Crook admitted, "The Apache is the most formidable warrior on Earth. He can shoot 20 arrows in the time it takes to reload a rifle." Meanwhile, in the Great Plains, the Comanche became horseback sharpshooters. By the 1850s, they dominated a territory stretching from Kansas to Mexico, raiding settlements with rifles in one hand and reins in the other. Their secret? They ground down gun sights for faster aiming and strapped quivers to their legs for rapid arrow access. At the Battle of Buffalo Wallow, 1874, a Comanche band pinned down U.S. troops for 2 days using alternating volleys of bullets and arrows, a tactic so effective the Army called it the Devil's Rhythm. But the ultimate flex was Geronimo's 1880s guerrilla campaign. Despite being outnumbered 10-1, his 35 Apache fighters evaded 5,000 U.S. troops for over a year. They stole rifles, ammunition, and even uniforms from dead soldiers, blending hit-and-run raids with psychological terror. Geronimo left a note on a dead cavalryman. "I will fight you in your own clothes." The U.S. finally captured him in 1886, but not before he'd become a legend for out-teaching the tech-heavy army. If you thought Mother Nature was neutral in warfare, think again. Native tribes didn't just adapt to their environments. They weaponized them. Take the Seminole Wars, 1816 to 1858. The Seminole turned Florida's Everglades into a nightmare for the U.S. Army. They'd ambush soldiers from mangrove thickets, then vanish into waist-deep water, leaving troops to battle heat stroke, alligators, and swarms of malaria-carrying mosquitoes. By 1842, the U.S. had spent $40 million, roughly $1.3 billion today, and lost 1,500 soldiers. Only 328 died in combat. The rest perished from disease or the swamp itself. General Thomas Jessup wrote, "This is a war not against men, but against the land. The Seminole is its vengeful spirit." Up north, the Iroquois reshaped forests for battle. During the 17th century Beaver Wars, they burned miles of woodland to create open killing fields, forcing enemies into exposed positions. Meanwhile, the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia poisoned French settlers' wells with crushed walnut husks in the 1600s, causing violent illness. When the French retaliated, Mi'kmaq scouts led them into tidal zones where incoming seawater trapped their wagons. However, the Plains tribes took environmental warfare to apocalyptic levels. During Red Cloud's War, 1866 to 1868, Lakota and Cheyenne fighters burned 12,000 square miles of prairie grass to starve U.S. cavalry horses. Without forage, Army mounts collapsed within weeks. By 1868, the U.S. abandoned 3 key forts along the Bozeman Trail, signing the Treaty of Fort Laramie. Red Cloud later taunted, "You came for golden land. We gave you ashes and hunger." Even trees became soldiers. In 1855, the Yakama people of Washington state ambushed Colonel George Wright's troops by felling 200-foot cedars across mountain passes. When Wright's men tried to clear the logs, Yakama archers lit the debris on fire, creating an inferno that trapped the column. Wright lost 100 men and called the tactic a devil's ambush. But to the Yakama, it was just Tuesday. They'd used controlled burns for centuries to manage forests. In September 1918, as U.S. troops prepared to assault German lines in France's Argonne Forest, they faced a problem. The Germans had cracked every Allied code. The Choctaw Telephone Squad had 8 Choctaw soldiers from Oklahoma. Using their native language, they relayed orders for a surprise attack. The Germans, baffled by the gibberish, failed to intercept the plans. The result? A decisive Allied victory. One officer admitted, "We'd have lost 10,000 men without those Choctaw boys." But the real code-talking legend began in 1942. The U.S. Marine Corps recruited 29 Navajo men to create an unbreakable cipher. Their language, unwritten and tonal, was the perfect code. They coined terms like da-hitihi, hummingbird, for fighter planes, and beshlo, ironfish, for submarines. At the Battle of Iwo Jima, 1945, Navajo code talkers transmitted 800 error-free messages in 48 hours, directing artillery strikes that saved thousands of Marines. The Japanese never cracked it. Captured documents showed their cryptographers thought it was a complex mathematical code, possibly developed by a genius. They had no idea it was a language banned in U.S. boarding schools just years earlier. Code talker Chester Nez, who'd been punished for speaking Navajo as a child, later said, "Our words were once called worthless. In war, they became priceless." By 1945, over 400 code talkers from 33 tribes, including Comanche, Hopi, and Meskwaki, had served. Their work remained classified until 1968, too valuable to risk exposure. Today, their legacy lives on. The NSA's modern encryption systems cite indigenous languages as inspiration for linguistic complexity. So the next time you hear someone call Native American warfare primitive, hit them with the truth. These warriors were playing mental chess while their enemies were still rolling dice. From outmaneuvering cavalry to mastering psychological warfare, indigenous fighters proved that brains beat brawn every time. Their strategies weren't just about survival, dominance, resilience, and thinking 10 steps ahead. And honestly, some of these tactics could still throw modern armies for a loop. And with that, we wrap up today's episode. We hope you enjoyed this video. Which story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for joining us once again. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Native American history, remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. See you in our next video.